Меня тоже?
Да, все супер. Okay, welcome to our first event series, Russia and Soviet Union 101. In this event series, we will be discussing topics about Eastern Europe from past and present with Professor Vasilii Schedrin. And for today's event, we have 3 questions from students. And I'll let Vasily take over.
Okay. Okay. Just to finish my introduction started by Fedor, I teach Jewish history at History Department of Queen's University, and my field of expertise is history of the Jews in Eastern Europe, in particular in Russian Empire, Soviet Russia, Soviet Union, and today's Russia. So that's my the part of my expertise in Russia, Soviet Union, Eastern Europe as a scholar. And in addition to that, personally, I was born in the Soviet Union and I lived in the country with that name until I was 23. Until the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. So, and I went through most of the genuine Soviet experiences, including kindergarten, school, army, whatever. And the university. Okay, so the questions that I received from Fedor are pretty broad. For example, the first one is that let me just pull them on my screen and then introduction to Russia and the stereotypes about Russia and why they're stereotypes, what was true, what was not, and to talk a little bit about Russian history and perhaps to talk about the stereotypes about Russian history. Okay, so let's let it be our first question. Perhaps you help me a little bit with the stereotypes. What kind of stereotypes of Russia do you have? Or Soviet Union or whatever? Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm actually from Belarus. So I was born in Belarus and I moved here when I was 4. And my parents were pretty young, so we just moved with me, my mom, my dad, to Canada. And I didn't really feel like they really, in like when raising me, they didn't put a focus on like teaching me about Belarusian culture or like the Soviet Union or anything like that. So I never grew up really like knowing much about like the stereotypes apart from what I learned from like school, like the little Canadian kids in school that like see Russian people on TV and are like, oh, they drink vodka and they're always drunk and they're all poor and they eat potatoes. But I never really felt a part of it. Like I never felt like I was less than. I didn't feel like they affected me much, but like the stereotypes that I kind of see now are like still kind of the same thing like that, but that Russian people are like cold and I don't know. I don't really have much to say on that.
Not friendly, perhaps aggressive.
Yeah.
Exceedingly aggressive.
Yeah. I see that in my family too. I see that my parents don't really talk about emotions that much, or aren't very like open to talking about like very personal things. Like they're very like kind of closed off, if you say.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So good. Let me try. I don't have the ready answer, but let me
It's
try.
okay.
That's I would answer based on my knowledge of the Russian culture and society. And we can start with Russian and then move on to Soviet and then to post-Soviet. In terms of Russian culture, that's the relatively young culture. We usually understand by culture the modern phenomenon of culture. So and we usually divide it into the high culture, like the literature, arts, political, any the culture that we see in public sphere, and in private sphere, it's our everyday culture, and we measure culture by degree of so-called civilization. Are we civilized people or we are not civilized people in terms of healthcare, food, hygiene, city planning, and general quality of living. And in these terms, I think that Russian culture is relatively young. So in the mid-19th century, it was still very large country, which officially was the empire, meaning there is the metropolitan area, the European Russia, including the old capital city of Moscow and new capital city of St. Petersburg, which was the historical core of the country that before 18th century was known as Muscovy, not Russia. So Russia was the official name of the country since the 18th century. And everything around Muscovy is the provinces, the sort of colonies, including places which are by any standard was more developed than the imperial core, like the Ukrainian, Belarusian territories in the today's Baltic countries. I use today's terms, so there is no Ukrainian, Belarusian, Baltics in the 18th century. So we are speaking about the former parts of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, mainly when we speak about Russia's western borderlands, Russian western colonies. And the less developed colonies beyond the Ural Mountains, which is known by the common name of Siberia, whatever is east of the Asiatic Russia. And there was a great diversity in terms of the development of different parts of the country. And I would say that, and then there is not a single culture and single homogeneous society. To oversimplify it, just because of the size, it was huge. And the capacity of the state to instill the same ethos, same culture, same values into society was very limited. Today, when we say Russian bureaucracy, we mean huge bureaucratic apparatus. bureaucracy in the 18th and 19th century was relatively small and had a limited reach to different parts, especially remote parts of the country, and they had the very limited abilities to placate and solve the country's social problems. So many people were left to their own devices mainly. So they developed very different cultures. And today we see the same. So in today's Russia, when you travel in the Far East, it's, Russia in the Far East. In Western Siberia, it's Western Siberia. Eastern Siberia, it's, again, south of Russia, very different kind of culture. West of Russia, north of Russia, and Moscow, a separate country within the country. And it's all, this kind of culture was shaped historically because of the, again, this large territorial expanse of the country. And the contacts with the local population and the former rulers of the region, like the, in terms of religion, we know that in Western Ukraine and in Belarus, we do have the Unit Church and Catholic Church, which we don't have in the Central Russia because of their, historically, this territory for a long time belonged to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Same to be said about the Latvia and Estonia, the former parts of the German-speaking countries. And in terms of high and everyday culture, we did have the division between the majority culture, which is the pretty primitive peasant culture, or rather cultures, but commonly sort of very rural, very traditional, not religious, but rather superstitious, and so on. And minority culture, it was the culture of the ruling class. To give you the idea of the proportion, it's of minority to majority is 1 to 99. So the elite of the society was very, very thin culturally. So its culture did not affect the majority culture much. So when they encounter each other, the encounter was also shaped by their very different social standing. So there is no sort of a shared culture. This situation started to change in the mid-19th century with the introduction of the popular education and with the Russian Tsars and their government's attempt to consolidate the country along some sort of shared national ideology. And that shared national ideology developed in 1830s included the Russian autocracy, Orthodox Christianity, and the thing they called народность, or the very vague category, which is very hard to define. But I would say some sort of the folk spirit. So these three things were invented to be the pillars of the imperial society. And that imperial society were mainly imperial. It was not Russian. So Russian was the official name. And until the last quarter of the 19th century, the empire was, the demography of the empire and the confessional structure of the empire was characterized by the predominance of Russians and Russian Orthodox Christians. Like 75% of those compared to 25% of non-Orthodox Christians or non-Christians like Muslims or Jews or animists. With the accusation of the Central Asia in the last quarter of the 19th century, that proportion changed. And the tendency until the revolution before 1917 was that this so-called alien segment of population, the non-Christians or non-Orthodox or non-Russians, or that the official term was inarodцы, aliens, literally translated, who were the full-fledged subjects of the Russian Tsar, as well as Russians, but well, non-Russians by any means. So that proportion started, the tendency was that the percentage of the non-Russian population was on the rise. After but along with this, the imperial government tried to integrate these non-Russian populations into the larger Russian society by developing what they call the Русская гражданственность, the Russian civility, Russian sense of well, civicness, civilness. It's not citizenship, because Russia was autocracy. There were no citizens. There were subjects of the Tsar with different privileges, with different rights, and so on, to be sure. But there was an idea that they are equally subjects of the Tsar, and they should share the some common values, such as, and foremost is the loyalty to the monarchy, and secondly, the general sense of culture. It's not the language, to be sure, but the language was the significant instrument in acculturation of these non-Russian peoples. So they had a right, generally, most of them, to enroll in Russian institutions, in Russian elementary schools, in institutions of higher learning, and to that they started to increasingly see Russian culture as their own. The very good example is Russian Jews, who just, many of whom just strived to become a part of the Russian society and larger Russian culture. There is no forced Russification. I mean, no non-Russian was obliged to speak Russian, except the certain areas in the Western region, those considered especially disloyal and potentially rebellious, like the former parts of Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, Lithuania, and parts of Western Belarus. So even in Catholic churches, Latin and Polish were prohibited, and they were obliged to give their sermons and in Russian, pray in Russian, and so on. But that was extreme case. It was not like full on, and in other areas of the empire, it's never been the case. There is also no forced conversion to Orthodox Christianity. Again, except certain areas in the middle Volga region with a huge population of the converted Tatars. And that's also determined historically because that was the very first non-Russian colony of Russia, acquired as a result of the war started by Ivan the Terrible in the 16th century. But it's not the state policy to convert. The policy was to encourage to convert. The policy was to support the Russian Orthodox Christianity as the so-called dominant religion, but it's not official religion of the state. It's true, it was the religion of the monarchy, it was the dominant religion, but the status of dominant religion compared to so-called recognized religions, such as Islam or Judaism or Buddhism, was that only Russian Orthodox Christian Church were allowed to proselytize, to make new converts. So to convert in any religion other than Russian Orthodoxy was a criminal offense. And religion as the institution played the enormous role in the empire because it was considered the building block of the society. The idea was that the religious elite, the clerics, would instill into Tsar's subject the sense of order and loyalty commanded by religious order, by the order of things established by God. It didn't matter what God. It could be Jewish God, Muslim God, Christian God, but the purpose of this, such religious instruction was instilled to them ultimately the loyalty to the Russian emperor, who's also had this mandate of power from God. Again, whatever God. For the most part of Russian history, the identity of imperial subjects were that of imperial subject, which is universal because they were equally the subjects of the Russian Tsar. But its other part was was religious. So you could be a Jew, a Muslim, Catholic, Protestant, Buddhist, whatever. Only the deviations from the internal sectarian movements who deviated from the dominant religion, from the Russian Orthodoxy, were persecuted in the empire based on the religion. So, for instance, the stereotype is that Jews were oppressed in the Russian Empire. It's debatable, we can find generally we can say so, but if we compare them religiously with the so-called old believers were oppressed significantly. So they can do like 10% of what Jews could do, at least on paper, at least according to the law. Economically, before 1861, before liberation of Russian serfs, Jews were free, at least, compared to the majority of Russian peasants, which made a significant difference. And the peasants were slaves, so they were like totally persecuted. Okay, so if we use today's terms like religious, secular, it's again very hard to define imperial society by these terms. Officially, it was religious, but in many cases that religiosity was superficial because the country was largely rural, socially peasant traditional. That tradition dated back to ancient times when there is no Christianity. So a lot of peasant culture was based rather on superstition. However, they integrated and made a part of their life the Russian Orthodox Christianity. But a lot of rites of that religion were shaped by their non-Christian past and the way of life. In the in late Russian Empire, that is the term that we use for the Russian Empire between 1850 and 1917, the country increasingly what we call modernized, which means that there is a considerable progress in terms of the development of the of public culture, improvement of everyday life, and sort of homogenization of the imperial society, not in terms of ethnicity, nationality, or religion, but by the way of life. One example is that the liberation of the serfs in 1861. So this is how 99% of the population finally united with that 1% of the elite. So since 1861, we have the society instead of majority and minority. Again, I am speaking in about tendencies. It's not the fact that this society emerged at once. It takes centuries. The second example is introduction of universal military draft in 1874. And that changed a lot because now it's not only on paper that nobility and peasantry were equal subjects of Russian Tsar. Now, different segments of Russian society really started to mix in the army because everyone should serve. Different terms in different capacities, but they started spending this time together. So army created that public space where Russians increasingly were becoming and starting thinking about them, not as the peasant from some district in Ural Mountains or noble from the city of Tambov, but as Russians. Now let's move on to the Soviet Union. I skipped the revolutionary times because it's the large topic in itself. Why Russian Empire collapsed, why the sort of what Lenin would call bourgeois revolution that aimed at just democratization and removal of autocracy failed to fulfill the desires of most of the Russian society. And as a result, the super radical revolution happened in the end of 1917, led by the most extremist, most radical political party in the country called Bolsheviks. In the Soviet Union, that was created, by the way, not right after the revolution, because the first stages of the revolution were mainly destruction, wars, the end of the First World War, the Russian Civil War, and then Russian-Polish War, many other wars. But by that involved a lot of territorial compromises on part of the Bolshevik government. But by the end of 1922, after this war period by and large ended, and the country started to recover from this very long period of constant upheavals, the government started to consolidate the country, and they did it within the same borders. So they didn't only take care of the central Russia. They wanted Ukraine, Belarus, Baltic states, Caucasus, Transcaucasia, Central Asia, Far East, and so on. So eventually they consolidated the country, but initially on December 30 of 1922, the new country called the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republics, with 4 constituent republics declared. Those republics was Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and the Transcaucasian Federation that included today's Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia. Then the size of the Soviet Union increased, and the country further fragmented into what we know by the, like in the post-war, in the post-Second World War period, as the 15 socialist republics. In terms of culture, there is no much change compared to the Imperial Russia. The country was still agricultural, demographically dominated by the rural peasant population, still very large, still with small and incapable bureaucracy. But the goal of the new government, the Bolsheviks, was to change it, was to transform this society to the socialist and eventually communist society. So they took enormous efforts, and in terms of culture, we should mention the so-called Cultural Revolution. The Cultural Revolution was the replacement of the old cultural elite, like artists, musicians, scientists, university professors, with the so-called proletarian cadres, with the people from the lower strata of the society. So they would promote the new type of culture called proletarian culture. The part of this cultural revolution was also a policy of the war against illiteracy, so aiming that every citizen of the Soviet Union would be able to read and write, at least. Both campaigns were successful. But economically, these policies and many other Soviet policies, including financing of the large military undertakings, were not sound. So the economy was very poor and undeveloped. So the government resorted to the medieval methods of developing the economy, such as expropriation and redistribution of wealth, or concentration of wealth in the hands of the government, the elimination of undesirable parts of population defined by class principle. So, for instance, Stalin's government wanted to nationalize and monopolize the agriculture. So the former small Russian peasant farms would be converted in big industrial farms producing the foodstuff mainly for the army, but also for the workers who produce the weapons and ammunition for the army. So the means of how this policy was implemented, that the means of production were just confiscated from the so-called kulaks, the most successful farmers, counted by million or 2 million. So these people were simply eliminated. They were deported to the mainly to Siberia, and deported didn't mean that they were settled there. So they tried to survive there, and most of them didn't survive. And that also created the flow, actually the flood of the population from the villages to the cities in order to survive. And in order to prevent this, Stalin limited the freedom of movement for the peasants. So every person in the country had a passport with the registration and a full entitlement to whatever state could give an individual citizen, except peasants. Again, like more than a half of population were turned into slaves of agricultural labor. But in terms of the high culture, the society largely based itself on the pre-revolutionary tradition. So if you look at the literary canon of like what kind of writers kids study at school, what kind of literature was published by the state publishing houses, it was same writers that kids study in the 19th century. Same Pushkin, same Tolstoy, same Dostoevsky, and so on. That included the entire system of the elementary, high education, and university education was entirely based on what existed before the revolution. Now it was infused with the communist ideology, the communist ideology in Bolshevik form. But again, it was, many scholars call this political arrangement and social composition of the Russian society as neo-traditional. So it's basically returned to the pre-revolutionary tradition, traditional forms, traditional institutions, while under party ideological control. And in addition to what we know about pre-revolutionary Russian society, the Soviet period added to it the extreme economic hardships. This morning I read the article that based on the archival case of the top Russian military official during the Second World War, and they investigated him just plundering on the Soviet territory when the Soviet army was retreating, on the foreign territory when the Soviet army was advancing. So, and it's not because of greed. It's because people lacked everything. And this kind of life created, like, contributed that every day was pretty grim for any given Soviet citizen. Not on the very top of the party ladder, but also on the very top of the party ladder, party hierarchy, especially during the times of Stalin, it was hard to survive because Stalin often cleans his apparatus from the bureaucrats. So the mood, the predominant, let's call the atmosphere in the society was that of the economic hardship, sometimes hunger and lack of the proper living quarters, the constant struggle to survive in hostile political atmosphere, and again in this economic situation. Plus, it's there is no way I would say, according to party ideology, the society had the bright communist future. But if we look at the individuals, I would say that from the individual point of view, there is no future. And that was especially grim and sad and so on. So struggle for survival was the source of aggression. The lack of sort of normal life is the source of not being very friendly, and the atmosphere of fear is created it's fragmented the society into elite and the ordinary people, and also atomized the society because everyone was for him or herself. And again, despite, according to the ideology, the society had a bright future and celebrated collectivism and diversity, the reality was very, very different. And it's interesting that the older generation, I mean, I am older generation, but older than me, many people insist that they, we didn't live good, but at least we had a great country. And when asked what is the great country, they would answer, oh yeah, everyone was afraid of us. We had the weapons, we had the largest army in the world, everyone had respect for us. There are many other opinions, but this one you hear most. The great country that we lost. Also, even if you live in such harsh conditions, you get used to it. And you're born in this situation, you grew up, you spend the best years of your life in this situation. So you remember them fondly. So people remember their past fondly, not like living in the stupid country under the stupid leadership that led nowhere. But their youth, their friends, moments of joy, family moments, and so on. Plus, they have they have many things guaranteed at very low level, but guaranteed, like a job, like the education, like the medical care. Again, the question is, what kind of job, what kind of education, what kind of medical care? And they were not great, to say the least. But I remember my parents. They hated this transformation of the Soviet Union, the emergence of the independent Russia and the democratization of the Russian society, because their world collapsed. They were not Bolsheviks. They were not members of the party. They were not ideal. They didn't share the ideology of the regime. But they lost everything. I understand them. While for the external observer, like me, they got a lot of things they dreamed during the Soviet times and didn't have a chance to get them. Like their summer house. They got it the next year after the fall of the Soviet Union. But again, they lost something else from their life. When people emigrate and they see the very different reality, they have very mixed feeling. So the instinct of survival is one of the strongest feelings and emotions, and they may say you, okay, these people are too friendly, they're too unassuming, so you can benefit in this situation. The second thing is the lack of trust. I don't trust anyone, anything. That's atomization of the Russian society, and that's the mistrust between people and the government and so on. So the best example is the fear of police. I have it in my blood. You see the police officer, you cross the street. Immediately, or you are in trouble, potentially, but with very high potential. Then you feel yourself like bearer of the more meaningful life and historical experience. The example is that recent presidential campaign in the United States with a lot of older generation Russian immigrants voting for Donald Trump. Not for Donald Trump, but actually against Joe Biden, because he represented the left wing in the Democratic Party. He was labeled socialist, and we are fed up with the socialism. So the logic goes, we have this experience which Americans don't have. So Americans are stupid. We are learned people. But yeah, and the fear of changes. In my case, it's probably the strongest emotion. So I don't want changes. I lived through so many changes. And when I came to America for the first time in 1993, I thought it's so stable. It's so good. It was the time when we didn't have imported cars in Moscow, and we had the products of the Soviet car building industry, and they were super noisy. When I first came to America, and the cars were there is no noise, so I thought, irrationally, that the cars are soft. That was my first feeling when I was on the street, and this is how I feel now. So yeah, hopefully what I told you is not all, and I am not pretending to tell you all. But maybe it's interesting. You hear something that you learn that answers your questions. Let's probably hear you now. Maybe you have more questions. Maybe not as big as the one I answered. Maybe smaller ones.
I think Cameron had a question.
Yeah, please. Cameron?
I think he's lagging a little bit. But his question was the identity struggle between tradition and Western influence. Like,
yeah, so you mentioned that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's a, yeah, we hear you. Cameron, go on. It's okay. Anyways, the struggle between traditional and Western, that's, it's, in fact, it's a big question, but in its contemporary...
You mentioned that the noble portion slim.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go on.
Okay, it's working now. So you mentioned that the noble part of, or the noble portion of society
Cameron, I think if you turn off the video, perhaps we at least hear you.
in the but despite that, it's of Russia. Is that the case?
May I ask you to start over?
Or maybe type.
Oh, maybe type. And while you're typing, maybe we have other questions. Or should I start answering the one about tradition and West? Okay, let me start. It's in its contemporary form. It appeared, this dichotomy, Russia West, appeared in the mid-19th century as a controversy between so-called Westernizers and Slavophiles. And that controversy between two segments of very small group of Russian intellectuals, provoked by the writings of Pyotr Chadaev, the major Russian philosopher, who wrote a series of articles about Russian past, present, and future, arguing that the Russia is grows apart from Europe, and that its main problem. Because Europe has the universal culture of Catholic Christianity, and Russia, by adopting the Orthodox Christianity, cut herself from the European developments, and even after joining Europe in terms of modernization, still intellectually, ideologically, and as a consequence, socially and economically, is lagging behind the Europe. Because the Orthodox Christianity is the is essentially ultra traditional. It's even by the name, it's Orthodox. So basically, you preserve the past rather than looking to the future. So Chadaev argued, and it was considered as the major insult to the Russian society, that perhaps Russia is destined to serve a lesson to other societies about her lack of development. So the and that created the controversy, mainly in writing, and then in I see Cameron's note, and I'll turn to it in a second. That major controversy, and it created two sort of intellectual, not political parties, called the Westernizers, those who thought that Russia should join Europe, at least intellectually, not in terms of religion, it was out of question, but follow European models of modernization. Eventually, it led to the idea of democratization of Russian life and so on. So Russia conforming to the West, to simplify it. The other party argued that it's no, that the Russian role in universal history is different. Russia is the exemplary in its spiritual attachment to Christianity. And while Christianity failed in many secularizing Western societies, Russia stays as a bulwark against these developments. So we should develop, we should probably maintain Russia's separateness and Russia's authentic forms of political organization and economy, including in the original controversy, autocracy, and even slavery. Okay, Cameron, people portion. Okay, I'll read the question. You mentioned that the noble portion of Russian society was small during the imperial days, but despite that, it seems like they were great contributors to the westernization of Russia through their access to Western culture, language, attire, etc. Is there some truth to this? Of course. So currently we're talking, I started answering the question talking about the ideological trends, ideological currents, and the intellectual controversies within the tiny segment of Russian society. The actual modernization and westernization is to be assessed based on the everyday life and what's going on in people's lives. So yes, people adopted Western stuff pretty quickly. So, such as when, after the liberation of the serfs, many many newly free farmers look to improve their agricultural enterprises. So they easily adopted the machinery they previously never seen, imported new technologies, they imported the new agricultural materials. They easily started to be a part of the international trade, exporting their goods directly to Europe, becoming a part of the world economy. And so with the urbanization of the Russian society, with former peasants moving to the cities, it's the same, of course. So we can call it Western culture. Today, in today's world, when we speak about globalization, it's the same thing. So it's rather sort of universalization of human culture, which has a, well, good things into it and bad things, but it's the process, and it's usually it's not ideological. It just happens. It's probably the best way to organize the economic processes, everyday culture, and so on. So today, people who go to theaters in Moscow and prefer major Hollywood pictures are not Westernizers. They just like these pictures. The same is true about people who prefer McDonald's to some kind of Russian restaurants. There are no comparable competing Russian chains, but I mean, I don't see it as a big problem. So again, my main point here that it's the the other name of Westernization and access to Western culture is the openness. Is when the society when society opens, then it becomes the. In Russia, they still seriously talk about Russian physics, Russian chemistry, or Russian historiography. Science, humanities, social studies are universal. So you have to at least know English in order to hear others and to be heard yourself in today's world. It's not a matter of patriotism to be a Russian historian. And it's a pity that in the past 40 years, nothing important about Russian history appeared in Russian language. That's really bad. If it requires more of the thing that people today called Westernization, yeah, we should have that Westernization. But again, I insist it's mainly openness of the society, openness of mind, the sense of integration in the larger world.
Okay. And the last question we had was about Belarus and what is going on there currently. I just wanted to add my own question to it. Do you think we will, like as Eastern European countries, will we ever shift away from a single ruler government? Because we see it a lot in Kazakhstan, Belarus, Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think this will change, or are we destined to stick with it?
No, as history shows, it's no one is destined for something. It depends on it depends on the people. So the perhaps the best thing to include into my answer is the concept of the historical agency. So when you're capable historical agent, when you can do something, right? That's the agency. And I see increasingly, I don't know about a lot about Belarus and Kazakhstan, just whatever I read in the papers or whatever. But in terms of Russia, I am seeing the increasing trend of people feeling, framing, and acquiring their agency. So if you look, I'll give you two figures. One is Navalny, of course. His political activity is based on the crowdfunding. So he has big givers, of course, but most of it is collected by the people who are interested and approving whatever he is doing. These people could be his voters, but again, this is the agency. You can do something through this funds collection or through the through many things. Then eventually, it's not given. I mean, Putin would not say, okay, let's have the true elections. I don't think so. And Navalny said that the next shift of power in Russia would happen not during elections, but on the streets. We'll see. No, it would not necessarily be a revolution. The second figure is a guy whose name is Evgeny Roisman. He is the former deputy to the Russian parliament. He is the former mayor of the very large Ural city of Yekaterinburg. And he has no official position right now, but he engaged in a sort of politics I would call the popular politics. It's not the same as populism or populist politics. It's that he's driven by what people needs. So his main instrument is the again similar to Navalny's his fund, but while Navalny fund is doing the investigation of the state corruption, the purpose of Roizman fund is to help people in hard situations, including lack of proper medical care, hard life situations, the injustice in courts, police violence, whatever. So people simply come or write to him, and he takes their requests, not just by word, but he tries to act on every request using his political influence, because he's in in official Russian politics for many years. Now, even being unofficial, he has these connections, and then his own staff who works with him, social workers, lawyers, so he can do things, and that's the people's politics. So people can do things on lesser scale. It's everyday things. But on the example of westernization, we see how powerful these everyday changes could be. And it's eventual. I don't know what kind of government Russia would have if Russia would preserve its integrity as the large federation. I don't know. It's hard to say. Everything is unique in history. Every experience is unique. Why, for example, Ukraine changes president like almost every 4 years? That's a unique case among the former Soviet republics in Eastern Europe, but in Baltic countries, it's considered normal. But again, we don't have the gene of totalitarianism in our blood. It's all. I just explained to you the Russian unfriendliness. Again, it's not genetic. It's just the historical experience, and it's hard for us, the mere humans, to think about this large spans of time. But I mean, it's not that large. Soviet Union existed for 70 years, and it's not surprising that it affected so many generations and so many political phenomena. But it's transient. It will pass. I'll give you example of Nazi Germany. The Third Reich existed 12 years, just 12 years. Many of you now present are twice 12 years. So you can tell that 12 years, it's a very short period of time, but we still have the consequences. We still live in the world shaped by the Third Reich, because we call it post-war, and the war was started by the Third Reich, and so on and so forth. So but everyone chooses the position. I mean, you can wait, but you can do other things. You can contribute to the changes.
I have a question about the sentiment of the great country, like you said. Can you explain a bit more about how that became? Because before you talked about how, like, you said like every day was pretty grim for pretty much every Soviet citizen. How did that turn into like a complete 180 into people thinking it was like a great country?
I'll give you simplified answer. So it's much more complicated, but just for now. It's the ethos of sacrificing individual lives towards the collective goals. Translated into everyday terms. And it's this collectivist ethos is in the communist ideology, and to translate it into the everyday life is that, yes, we don't have enough consumer goods, but it's because we have to sacrifice production of consumer goods, and as a result, our consumption, to our military might, which is needed in order to curb the aggressive imperialism of the West and especially United States. So we have to buy a lot of bombs in order to successfully withstand that conflict. That's the ethos. And whoever was complaining was basically subversive. If you want more butter or a new toy for your kid and you complain, then you're anti-Soviet, because as a consequence of having more butter, we have less bombs, so we lose. Make sense? That's how it worked. So you have to sacrifice it. It also happened during the annexation of Crimea, when the response of the people was, oh yeah, we have the economic sanctions against us. The ruble just plummeted, losing like 200% of its value. We lost our jobs, but we would make the sacrifices because we are great again. Trump's slogan is the same. So we sacrifice this in order to get this. And this, what we're getting, makes us great. But the feeling of greatness is, illusory. It's purely political, ideological, misleading, and so on. But very powerful.
Okay, thank you.
I don't think we have any more questions.
Okay, so if we meet next time, so today was the test meeting. If you like it, and if you like more meetings like this, I would say that I would like, and it depends on you, it's your choice, to have more questions. So instead of lecturing, I would rather address what interests you. Okay, so let's think about this, but also we can make this, we can make these meetings question driven, which I like. I also like if we have them thematic driven, so we can vote for the theme, like Russia West or whatever, and talk about it all the time. But okay, hopefully today's experience was good and we'll see what happens next.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for your questions. And thank you, Vasilii, for your informative discussion and lecture. It was really amazing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.